Alrighty, so let's get into it. The first discipline we want to drill into or get ourselves thinking about is this idea of over-communicating. People heard the term over-communication? Has anyone heard of Patrick Lencioni, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Teen? He was in Sydney the other day. I think it's his first trip to Australia. And he wrote a fantastic book about why teens struggle. He also wrote another book called The 4 Obsessions of an Extraordinary Executive. But in his work, one of the things he's quite obsessed about is the importance of over-communicating, of making sure everybody knows, of taking away people's ability not to know. The only logical thing is I know. And that level of proof, that standard, if you like, particularly when you apply it to purposeful vision and action, that's not a straightforward task for a leader. How can everybody continuously be engaged on that vision and action? Not how's I, the leader, in the course of the time I have, make sure I do a bit of effort to keep people engaged. How can I guarantee everybody knows all the time? That's what extraordinary school leaders seem to do well. And they do it well through these two things. By developing a clear line of sight as a leader, and then a particular way they actually cultivate vision and action, which is quite different from most school leaders we encounter. If we start with a clear line of sight, it's pretty obvious what that means, generally speaking. I can literally see, I can see all that's before me. And school leaders in large schools, it's very unlikely that you can continuously see everything, right? Something comes as a surprise to you. Would that be fair? It's quite difficult the bigger the organisation, and it's exponential. The larger the organisation, the more difficult a continuous line of sight is, for an example. This is one of the interesting things we find, though, about how extraordinary school leaders do it. They have a leadership team. We've all got leadership teams. In high schools, you've probably got an executive team, a smaller one, and then an SLT, a senior team, which might have 17 to 20. All pretty straightforward so far. Then they have a role description, a list of duties that they're all doing. And sometimes that turns into a contest about who's the busiest. You ever done that exercise? Oh, and then there's this, and then there's that, and then there's this, and you're all looking at your watch, and oh, don't forget I've got that. If you want to get a continuous line of sight, you have to break it up into people leadership and data leadership. Because the contest for who's the busiest is usually a stream of ultimately data responsibilities somebody's got. Data responsibilities, data leadership belongs on dashboards. Pretty straightforward. Just mapping it, keep an eye on it, work it out. And people leadership belongs on org charts, organisational charts. Great, extraordinary, amazing principals are hip to this trick. And they quickly organise and pull their leadership teams' duties and responsibilities apart. And they map data leadership and people leadership. And then they move all their data leadership onto dashboards and all their people leadership into these organisational charts. And they concentrate, you're right, then they concentrate very heavily on their people leadership. And the ELTs and SLTs are constantly focused on people leadership. They create charts like this, these extraordinary leaders. Okay, we talked. The previous speakers talked about group versus a team. Yeah? What's a group? What's a team? In schools, for us, it's very straightforward. It's very black and white. Teams are where they're contracted to work. Again, large high schools, Marani, Western Mackay. That's your contracted professional priority. You have a line manager in that team. You have a common intersecting interest. That's your team. That's your primary team. Over here are your working parties, your improvement groups. And these are groups of people drawn from different parts of this puzzle. And improvement groups are collegial priorities. Why is this important for extraordinary school leaders? For two reasons. One, they have to make sure their executive team has line of sight over all teams in the school, and they have to make sure their executive team has membership and influence in all their working parties. The second reason this is very important is because schools can be quite challenging or stressful sometimes. Principal stress, Philip Riley's research, the teacher stress, your work cover premium in Queensland, it's a real issue. And teachers ultimately have to know which teams they belong to at any given time, and they have to be able to make trades. They have to be able to explicitly decide in a magic moment what not to do, what they're not going to get done. The problem for an average school leader is they're not getting ahead of the game and helping the teacher forecast what not to do. They're simply reacting when later on they find out it wasn't done. The extraordinary school leaders do this. And once we know who's who in the zoo, we remind everybody pretty continuously at every staff meeting that your contractual priority is the thing that you must always hold number one. And if at any given time, for family, personal, any reason at all, you cannot meet your collegial priorities, that's okay, provided you tell us first. And then you're on point, making sure people always have permission to not do something, which makes it harder in the car park at the end of the day for people to say to themselves or their peers, I just can't get it all done. Because they're looking at each other and they know every month or every fortnight they get their lecture about what not to do. That's extraordinary leadership. That is well-being. Constant, explicit permission about what you don't have to do in your job. That's genius. And line of sight, constantly knowing what's on and off track. You move all your AIP, your improvement, annual improvement plan, and your quadrennials, you move all that activity over here. As a principal or as a deputy principal, you want it all here. Because this is a bit, remember, no one gets to negotiate on. And all the other fantastic things that aren't core to that responsibility, core to your relationship with your ARD, you put them over here. And what have you done? You've automated a lot of security about the performance of the school over time, and again, you've given people permission to say no to stuff. Pretty handy. Pretty handy. The second bit then is, well, that's what you do with all those people things. What do you do with all the data? What do you do with these giant lists of data? And one of the interesting things we've learned over the years is the good schools, if you like, tend to rely on the headline indicators given to them by their departments. Okay, New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, it's very similar traction. And the typical headline indicators are what we call an 80-20 dashboard. They're mapping 80% of their output variables and then a mixture of whatever else is kind of convenient inside their system. And that's kind of the core that most schools that we've encountered, they tend to operate on because the department collects it and gives it to them. That becomes the large part of their own dashboard. And that's not necessarily the right thing. The department's job is to collect information to run the state of education across the state. Do you agree? So they don't need the granular detail you need to run your facility, your school. You need way more information about your school than the department needs to have an opinion about the state of the entire Queensland education system. And so the extraordinary leaders not only map their stuff, they actually use a ratio called 50-40-10. 50% of the data they're trying to track is the output data, usually pretty handy with one school and the reporting systems in Queensland. 40% of their data is input data, which is a whole other world of opportunity for us as school leaders. Yes, walkthroughs and other things are points of data, and yes, they're useful. But once you start understanding, how we track input measurement, there's a raft of other simpler things that can offset or enrich in the picture of what's really going on with your quality teaching. Remember, Hattie's work tells us only 30% of the variance in student achievement is in the teacher. So if the kid's not performing well in the class, what's going on with the other 70%? You ever asked that? And why then are we sometimes over-focused on the 30% of the teacher when there's 70% of the room? The teaching actually could be really quite high quality. It's the other 70% of the variance that's in play. How would we even know? Yes, a walkthrough will help us get a single snapshot in time of what's going on, but no, it is not a reliable indicator of what's happening when we're not in the room. We know this because I've spent my career training other psychologists, and you're not allowed in their therapy room, right? That's, you have one-way mirrors and videos, you don't go in, that's how that works. So we have other ways to maximise the quality to know what's going on. And it's exciting times for us as we shift around and start thinking about input measurement. If we track input measurement, we're going to see a massive change in how the kids are performing. Teachers themselves are going to be more in control of their own journey. So just something to consider there. And then, of course, you've got your influencer variables. Only 10% of your scan, though, as a school leader, if you're extraordinary, you have to keep an eye on it. Every school has industry variables. Over there in this particular school, it's coal and sugar. And they can track that. It doesn't run on 14-day cycles, it runs on longer cycles. but they keep an eye on what's influencing the situation. So, for example, in Morani, Western Mackay, if the sugar mill's shut at an unscheduled time, it causes financial hardship in the community. The financial hardship in the community then impacts family functioning, which then knocks on into how students are performing in the school, which then elevates spikes in behaviour, which increase teacher distress. So we did a big project with Claremont out at Ipswich, a special school, and when they started to track how welfare payment cycles, just the economics of their local community, how that impacted behaviour episodes, how that impacted school lunches, how that was actually impacting on what was going on in the place, they could realign how they provided services. Like they didn't need an extended brekkie club on certain days every fortnight. They weren't the problem days, and they need double the amount on other days. They didn't have behaviour spikes on certain days in the 14-day cycle. Okay? And on other days, Trish, the principal, needed to, 2 days out from what appears to be a pretty predictable spike, needed to address all the staff and remind them that they're excellent teachers and we're coming up to just a known pressure point. And whatever you do, take nothing personally, you're a great teacher. And by giving the pep talk before the spike happened, because they didn't map in the spike, because it was an industry variable, the following 2 days after it all, she didn't have teachers on stress leave. She didn't have young grads going, I don't think I'm cutting up for teaching. They braced themselves because they could predict it. Yeah, it's one that often we don't think about. But it's right in front of us anytime. Sometimes there is no trend. You go, I wonder if there is something predictable in this, and there isn't. A lot of the time there is, though. And once you can predict it, you can use it to maximise the school's performance. You can then have eyes up at Morani for the year 30, year 11 and 12 boys and girls who we know their parents are affected by the unexpected shutdown. We know they're in hardship. We need to have eyes up for any change in their behaviour, well-being support during critical times. Yeah, because you're just using some pretty basic diagnostic indicators that are sitting out there anyway. We're not talking about rocket science. You get your ELT or SLT, senior leadership team in the room, they already know between them. But often we don't organise the information and track it. That's all we're raising. When we start to organise and track this stuff, everybody gets the benefit. The other part of this thing, that was our line of sight, remember? What is it I should be checking and scanning and organising? How do I make sure I always know what's going on? And more importantly, how do I make sure everybody else always knows? That's the real valuable bit. Because if they all know, then they're going to, generally speaking, do the right thing. A lot of good-intentioned people in very large schools often don't end up doing the right thing, simply because they're all doing their own right thing. Yeah, very rarely anyone in our education system is psychopathic or sociopathic, is genuinely wanting to do the right thing. So we're kind of blessed with that. The other reason we come out of kilter, though, is the second part of understanding over-communicating purpose-driven vision and action. And that's about how do you develop a purpose-driven vision for your school. A lot of the schools we work with, they have what we would call a leadership team-driven vision. Leadership teams sort themselves out at a given point in time, go away on a retreat or something, and they come up with something and they launch it. And then there's an engagement cycle. Anyone ever had that? Yeah. And the leadership team have, for some reason, I still don't quite understand, a view that they're the ones, the great sunlight that shines upon them from the powers that be, they're in charge of setting the vision. And it's up to them to come up with it. Has anyone ever seen that? Yeah. Schools are interesting though, because they usually existed, unless you're a foundation principal, they existed before you turned up, yeah? And they'll probably exist after you're gone. They'll be the last of their automated things to go. And if they already exist and they're functioning to some extent, then they already have a purpose, don't they? They're already doing something useful. The people who are on the payroll already have inside their heads a sense of what it's all about. And so extraordinary school leaders have constant communication with their staff about these three circles. This is the hedgehog from Jim Collins, about trying to articulate what it is that the staff are passionate about the expertise set. Maybe we're best at it, or we need to be best at it, because we've got the mill, we've got this industry opportunity, we've got this challenge, so we need expertise. And why the doors stay open. What really drives our resource engine? What's the brutal facts of why our school exists? And an extraordinary leader is having a yak all the time with staff. And they're far more interested in their staff's answer to these questions than their own view. Why is that? Because their job is to understand the DNA of the school they lead and then enhance that DNA. You with me? That's your job. That's my job as a consultant, is to spend a lot of time working out what's going on and simply try to enhance what is already there. And that's important, because when, as a leader, you can have purpose-driven vision, you have buy-in straight away because it's inherently meaningful because it came from the staff. Would you agree? Sorry, yeah, boss, that's what we do anyway, that's great. But yeah, no, it would be good to move forwards with some of that stuff. So you've got to wear out your shoes with that. You've got to talk to a lot of people. It becomes pretty easy to take the next step, which is to turn that sense of purpose into a future-focused vision by simply using a Y chart. You've all used Y charts? I love it. I've learned so much from teachers these last 4 years. What would something look like, sound like, and feel like if it wasn't perfect, if it was great at a certain point in time in the future? Teachers have no trouble sharing what kind of forward vision they're trying to achieve using a Y chart. You then data mine what's on here, and that's how you get your goals. From your goals, of course, you have your action plan, the inquiry tools, great one that we're using at the moment. It's all, they're not complex documents. But now you're getting, you see on the bottom there, distributed leadership. If everybody's caught up in this and thinking it's cool, who's got distributed leadership? You do. How do you prove it? Well, there's everyone's different stuff all working towards a common purpose. That's a different way of setting vision than a good school leader would do it. That's how a great school leader would do it. And that's something to consider about how that currently works, or how you approach vision casting and strategic planning in the school. So our first checkpoints arrived. On your book, you can see we've got a little space for you to scribble a number. And what we wanted you to do here is simply think from, as you can see, it's as simple as it sounds, where would you rate yourself? Where's your capability on these things? Creating a line of sight, people and data leadership, and driving a purpose-driven vision rather than a leadership-driven vision. So can I encourage you just to guesstimate and write something in your book now? Just give you a moment for that. We'll do one more and then we'll hit our first breakout point.